Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today we're going to look at the 32nd in my series on the Spiel des Jahres, or German Game of the Year award winners. And today's game is Kingdom Builder. This is an abstract strategy game for 2 to 4 players, 5 if you have the expansion, designed by Donald X. Vaccarino, the designer of Dominion. And like Dominion, this is a game that is very different from game to game. It has a lot of random elements in the setup, which are going to change both how you score and how the map of the board is laid out. The box has about 45 minutes. I think that you could play with quick players more like a half an hour, but 45 minutes seems fair, I suppose, for ages 8 and up, which seems appropriate as well. Let me take a minute to show you how this game works, at least one permutation of it, and then I will come back and let you know what I think about it. Here I've set up a game of Kingdom Builder for 2 players, and you can see that the game board is made up of 4 modular boards. You'll just draw 4 of those at random, put them down and form one giant board. Some of the spaces here will be surrounded by gold. On those spaces you're going to put 2 tiles matching the icon depicted on them onto each of those spaces. And then there are also these gray spaces here. These are castles. Placing at least one piece next to them will score you 3 points at the end of the game. Also, you'll take one of the unused boards, flip it over, and use it as a scoring track. Most of the scoring in this game will take place at the end of the game, but sometimes there will be in-game scoring, especially if you're using some of the expansion cards. Each player will get 40 settlements, which are just small wooden houses in their player color. And then a start player will be also picked, and they'll get a start player tile. For each of these set of icons that you've put out, you're going to put out one of these little legends that show you what those special icons let you do. Collecting these gives you special powers on your turns. And then finally, from a deck of 10 that are included with the base game, more if you have expansions, you're going to take 3 of these scoring cards at random, and these will tell you how the game will be scored, so it will vary from game to game. In this particular game, the player is trying to create as many distinct settlement areas, so placing these down in separate groups on the board will create scoring opportunities. Here they're trying to create settlements next to locations, which are where these tiles are, or next to castle hexes, and they'll have 1 gold for each settlement that meets either of those requirements. And then the third card is try to create as many settlements as possible onto one horizontal line. So just on one line, any line going across the board, you get to score one of those, and you get 2 gold per settlement on that line. So players are going to keep that in mind when they're placing their pieces onto the board. And the way that they're going to do that is pretty simple. Each turn they'll just draw 1 card. So if it's the blue player who's first, they've drawn a desert card, and now they have to place 3 of their settlements onto desert spaces. So they might choose to do that here. Let me see if that would be a really great move. Maybe they would just do it 1, 2, 3 here, which gets them adjacent to this castle, but more importantly, it makes it so that if they drew another desert, they would not be constrained in where they're placing cards. The reason being that whenever you're building, you have to build adjacent to one another. So this player had to build 3, so they built them all adjacent to one another. But now if they had to build on a desert again, there's no desert adjacent here, so they would be able to place in this desert, this desert, this desert, or so on. So trying to corral your options over the course of the game is really the way that it works. You want to make sure that you're going to not be forced to play in a certain space when you play a card. Although by doing that, this player would have to place here if they drew a forest, here if they drew a field, or here if they drew a ravine. So that may not be a particularly great space. A better space, for example, might be up here, and then they could go 1, 2, 3. Here they're not adjacent to any other type of terrain, so they would have complete options open unless a desert was drawn, because they would not have any adjacency requirements, and they would also get to collect this tile. And what this tile lets them do, you can see here, is it allows you to place an additional settlement down on the card type that you've just drawn. So they could execute that right away. They would just take that token, and again, if they collected the second token, they'd get to use that power twice per turn, but you can only collect 1 token from each place. And they might choose to place here, and now you see they are starting to get the horizontal line bonus here, so that would be at least 6 points for them at the end of the game if they built out this horizontal line and scored that one. So that would be the end of that player's turn. Now we just go on to the next player's turn, and they've drawn this forest. So again, they would have to place 3, so they might choose to place well, this person certainly got that token already. They might want to go next to that one, but let's say that they instead go down here by this area here, and they go, actually, let's say they go 1, 2, 3 here, and then that would let them claim this token, which you could see on this card here, allows them to place a settlement into a field. So they have to do that if adjacent if possible, and there is a field adjacent next to their, oh, I've used the same color pieces. There is a field next to their flower area, so they would have to place into that field. So let's just say they do that, and that would be their turn. Now just go back to the other player, they would draw, and they've gotten a ravine. And now, because they're not next to any ravine, they could go anywhere onto the board and start placing. So for example, they might go over here and place 1, 2, 3. And now they'll collect this tile. Actually, since they collected that tile, they might choose to do this. And again, now they have 2 tiles, the one from the last turn, which allows them to place another piece in the section that they've just drawn. So they might, for example, choose to place over here or here. And now for this one, it allows them to, as long as they have a line of 3, they could place another piece along that line. And that does not have to be on the terrain type that they've just drawn, so that player could extend their horizontal line here. So that will be very powerful in allowing them to extend that line over the course of the game. So this is just basically how the game is going to go back and forth with players drawing a card. So here this player drew a flower. Because they've filled up this flower space, they're able to place on any other flower space in the game. So they might, for example, go over here and place their 3, and then take this token, and then execute those tokens, and so on. So like I said, the game is just players drawing a card, placing onto that terrain type, following adjacency rules if possible, and then executing any special tiles that they might have collected. And the game will just keep going back and forth like this until one player runs out of settlements. If the start player is the person who does that, or you just finish out the round, so players will get an equal number of turns, and then you'll just execute the scorings. So again, scoring is going to depend on the cards that come out, but in this case, it would be 3 points per castle that you're adjacent to, and you just mark that on the score track, and then you would score each of the 3 cards independently. So for example, you would look at the settlements that are next to a hex. So here the blue player would have 1, 2, 3 points from that. You would look at how many different settlement areas the player has. So this player has 2 different settlement areas, so they would get 2 points. And then here the adjacent, or the horizontal line, they would get 2, 4, 6, 8 points for that. So this is how this game would score, and like I said, it's going to score differently every time that you play because of these random elements of the board and the cards. And that is how you play Kingdom Builder. Alright, so that is Kingdom Builder, and this is definitely a game that's going to play very differently from game to game, which is both a strength and a weakness. You could certainly choose to use the same setup for more than one game, which would, I think, make the game feel more strategic. But I think the nature of the game tends to be pretty tactical, with both the random setup requiring you to figure out the puzzle of the game each time you play, and the nature of that card draw essentially dictating where you're able to place each turn. So really it's a game where you have to do the best with what you're dealt, literally and figuratively in the sense of the setup. The game is definitely strategic. It makes you think in very clear terms from the start of the game. If I place here, what does that mean for my next placement? Insofar as if you place adjacent to a lot of territories, you're going to have to fill those territories in before you could draw a card and move off of there. So thinking about that from the start of the game is something that you definitely want to explain to new players the first time they play. Otherwise, they'll essentially be stuck in one section of the map. Yet at the same time, this game has an interesting turning point where you want to be able to control where you're placing at a certain point in the game. Again, this depends entirely upon the scoring setup, but oftentimes At the start of the game, you want to spread out so you're able to grab as many of those tokens, which give you special powers, as possible. But then after you've collected those, you want to start hunkering down and collecting, scoring in a single area. For example, some of the cards score your largest territory, or some of them might score all in one line or all on one section of the board. And taking advantage of that requires the opposite tact of the opening, where you're trying to spread out and put a few cubes here, a few cubes here, there. I say cubes, they're just settlements, which I think shows you how thematic this game is not. But that's not a detriment to the game. I think that's, it's a colorful game. It looks fun, and it has a lot of variety in it. It's definitely more lively than a lot of, other abstract games. And I think that randomness and the, tactical nature of it just work in its favor and keep it from being, something that's too brain burning. Even with 4 players, you can easily knock this out in 30 to 40 minutes, and I think that that's a real asset of the game. I will say that this game is not necessarily something that's, taken the board gaming world on fire like Donald Vaccarino's last game, Dominion, but it's, to me, just almost as good as a design as that. It's something that, I find very replayable, very fun to play, and it's an interesting game that basically presents you with a puzzle every turn. Some people think that the fact that you draw one card and that dictates your placement really constrains your movements in an unfair way, but I think the game is really working around that, not really defined by that, and that's something that I think is only going to come out as you play the game a few times. So overall, I think that this is a totally worthy winner of the Spiel des Jahres. It's not the flashiest game to have won the award, and it's maybe a little bit more cerebral than a lot of the recent winners, which tend to be emphasizing fun and interaction with other players. This is more of a classic board game in the sense of games like chess and checkers and whatnot. But that's terrific. I think there's plenty of room for the awards body to give out this, the award to this sort of game. So in all, I would recommend Kingdom Builder, and thanks for watching.